In our day-to-day life, we don't usually call it co-regulation. We just know who we feel better around, who steadies us, who grounds us, who we pick up the phone to call when we're having a shaky moment. You could say that co-regulation is how our bodies borrow safety from one another. Welcome to Oxygen for Educators. I'm one of your hosts, Michelle Kinder. It's our hope to bring you thought-provoking, unscripted conversations full of actionable ideas to fuel your important work in the world. Thanks for tuning in. This space is for you. Hi friends, this is Michelle Kinder, and welcome back to our first Radical Hope episode of 2026. Before we begin, I want to take just a moment to situate us in the larger arc of the series. Last year, we spent our time together in what we called inner work as a protective factor. We explored befriending our nervous system, learning to recognize signs of safety and danger, practicing self-compassion, understanding the inner critic and cultivating an inner mentor, building coping flexibility, and paying close attention to where and how we place our attention. All of that work matters deeply, and it has limits because inner work does not happen in a vacuum. We're relational beings, and we were never meant to regulate our nervous systems in isolation. This year, in the Radical Hope series, we're going to be building on inner work as a protective factor by diving into connection as a protective factor. We will explore what happens between nervous systems, how safety is shared, how regulation can be extended and borrowed, and how hope is sustained collectively instead of privately. We're starting this section with co-regulation because it sits at the center of everything else we'll explore in this part of the series, namely community care, belonging, grief, love, and the webs of support that make it possible to keep showing up. So, if the last section helped you understand yourself better, the episodes we'll be doing for this section will help you remember that you were never meant to carry this work of being human alone. Put simply, co-regulation is what happens when another person helps your nervous system feel safe enough to settle. This isn't a skill we master. It's actually a very human capacity that we return to. It's the experience of being with someone whose presence steadies you, which often makes it easier to think clearly and make sense of whatever's happening. In our day-to-day life, we don't usually call it co-regulation. We just know who we feel better around, who steadies us, who grounds us, who we pick up the phone to call when we're having a shaky moment. From a nervous system perspective, you could say that co-regulation is how our bodies borrow safety from one another. Just notice for a moment who came to mind when you heard that. Co-regulation is a critical extension of self-care, and this distinction matters. So much of the work around nervous systems and mental health is personal work. It's work we do to navigate stress, uncertainty, grief, and change. And at the same time, there are layers. Context matters, systems matter, relationships matter. And when those layers are ignored, self-care can quietly turn into pressure. And we start absorbing the implicit message that if we were doing this right, we would feel better by now. That's where that shame spiral begins. not because people aren't trying, but because they're being asked to regulate in isolation. This episode is not an invitation to try harder or to manage yourself better. It's an invitation to widen the circle, to understand that self-care and co-regulation were never meant to be separate. They work together, and when one is missing, the other can't do its job. Co-regulation is a term coined by Stephen Porges, who founded polyvagal theory. And at its core, it's very simple. It's how nervous systems connect to create a shared sense of safety. What's interesting is that we recognize co-regulation very easily in infancy. A baby cries, they don't yet have the capacity to meet their own needs. A safe adult comes close through touch, voice, eye contact, presence. The baby settles, the nervous system shifts. That's co-regulation. But where Western culture loses the thread is in assuming that once we develop the capacity for self-regulation, we should no longer need co-regulation. But co-regulation isn't something we outgrow. It's a lifelong biological imperative. Our nervous systems need each other across our entire lives. There are moments, especially under chronic stress, when no amount of internal coping can pull us out of survival mode on its own. We need another regulated nervous system to help create the conditions for safety again. Needing that does not in any way indicate that something is wrong. It actually means that things are working as designed. Last year, we talked about the importance of completing the stress cycle, meaning that stress doesn't resolve just because a situation ends. It resolves when the body has a chance to return to safety. What co-regulation offers is a way to complete that cycle with the support of a safe enough other. It's in the presence of someone who feels safe that the nervous system can reorient and return to that state of connection. Long before we had language for nervous systems, attachment research was already telling us this story. Researchers like John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth showed us that humans come into the world neurologically unfinished. We don't just learn how to regulate, we learn regulation in relationship. Secure attachment isn't about perfection. It's about responsiveness and repair and being seen and soothed enough times that the nervous system learns, I don't have to do this alone. And that learning doesn't expire in adulthood, which brings me to one of the clearest illustrations we have of just how deeply our nervous systems depend on connection. There's a well-known experiment by developmental psychologist Edward Tronick that illustrates this beautifully. In the experiment, a caregiver interacts normally with an infant, smiling, responding, engaging. Then, for a brief moment, the caregiver goes emotionally still, not angry, not leaving, just neutral. And within seconds, the infant shows signs of distress, not because something bad happened, but because signals of co-regulation disappeared. When the caregiver returns to interacting normally, the infant's nervous system reads that connection and safety, and the infant settles. What this teaches us is profound. Emotional absence can be just as dysregulating as conflict. That doesn't stop being true in adulthood. Most of us can think of someone in our lives whose emotional absence impacts our sense of safety, even though there's not any significant conflict that you could point to. I want to share a metaphor that I've referenced before, but it really bears repeating here because it captures co-regulation so clearly. And I learned this from Dr. Stephen Finn. Imagine coming into the world as a tiny cup, one that presumably grows over time. Now imagine liquid pouring into that cup. The liquid represents life happening. Noise, change, disappointment, fear, joy, uncertainty, all of those inputs. When the cup is very small, in infancy, almost all of that liquid spills over. Infants don't have the capacity to hold their emotional experience on their own. They need adults to help manage every aspect of it. So now imagine that beneath that tiny cup is a saucer. The saucer represents the people who care for us: parents, caregivers, teachers, safe adults. They catch what we can't yet hold. Over time, and especially when those saucers are reliable, the cup grows. We build capacity. We develop self-regulation. We can hold more liquid in our cup. We become more able to hold whatever life brings. But here's the part we often forget. No matter how big your cup gets, you are never done needing a saucer. No matter how skilled you are at self-regulation, you are never done needing co-regulation. If we place this metaphor alongside everything we've lived through in recent years, it becomes clear that there is no version of resilience that doesn't include someone else catching part of the overflow. Many educators are incredibly skilled at being saucers for others. They hold students, colleagues, families, and all different people in the system every day. What can be harder is allowing themselves to be held. So don't think of this as a checklist, but more as just sort of like something to pay attention to and notice. Just sort of reflect on who you tend to be a saucer for in your life, who, when things spill over, helps catch some of that liquid for you. And then when was the last time you leaned, like really leaned on someone else to help you through a rough stretch? So that is certainly not a failure of strength. It's an expression of being human and knowing that the way we regulate our nervous systems, especially in times of stress, is in connection in relationship. There's a body of research called social baseline theory that explains co-regulation from an evolutionary lens. In simple terms, the human brain evolved assuming shared load, not solo coping. When we're alone, the nervous system can perceive higher threat. Stress responses can be stronger. Regulation can cost more energy. At a very basic level, the nervous system is always asking, am I carrying this alone? When the answer is yes, threat feels more imminent. Stress feels more overwhelming. And getting your nervous system to a baseline sense of safety costs more. This is why isolation accelerates burnout and why community can never be viewed as a luxury. Our need for community is baked into our biology. Humans evolved to regulate, survive, and make meaning together. Co-regulation often looks deceptively simple. Think of one of your saucers. They probably aren't doing anything grand or dramatic. Maybe it's as simple as someone staying, someone slowing down, spending time with you, making eye contact, not needing for you to be any different than who you are and how you are. It's usually subtle, but the body reads that as co-regulation. You can often witness in real time the impacts of this gift of co-regulation. And we see it in the body. We see the breath settle, a posture soften, the panic or vacancy look in the eyes recede, and even a brightness around what's possible reads on people's faces. And these aren't small things. They're signs that the nervous system has pulled up and out of fight, flight, or shutdown and has found safety again. There's some gentle principles that can help us be more intentional about how we offer co-regulation to the people in our lives, students, colleagues, family, and friends. And the foundation of all of it is this. Please don't miss this part. All co-regulation begins with a commitment to our own self-regulation. Not perfectly, not all the time, but with enough awareness to notice the state that we're bringing into any space. From there, co-regulation is less about doing and more about how we are with one another. It can look like approaching someone from curiosity and generosity of spirit, seeking to understand before trying to fix. It can look like paying attention to proximity or touch, knowing how powerful those can be when they're safe, wanted, and appropriate. It often includes reflecting or gently naming what we're hearing, not to get it right, but to help the other person feel seen and understood. And just as importantly, it means knowing when to pause, when to offer space, when redirection or rest is more supportive than conversation. These aren't techniques to master or boxes to check. It's really just reminders of ways that you already know how to be with people, especially in moments when someone's nervous system needs support more than solutions. Burnout research from scholars like Christina Maslach show us that burnout is not just about workload. It's about the absence of shared holding. When people feel alone in responsibility, the nervous system shifts into survival. Energy gets diverted toward coping and protecting, and over time, meaning the thing that sticks for us and keeps us in the work begins to thin. When support returns, when responsibility is shared and someone else helps hold the weight, energy comes back online. Not because the work is suddenly easy, but because it's no longer being carried alone. This is why co-regulation isn't just a nice to have. It's protective, and it affects things like retention and recruitment. This isn't just theory. It shows up in real organizational outcomes. Today's job seekers care about culture and connection, sometimes more than pay. Over half say culture is more important than salary when they're deciding where to work. And employees with close work friendships are much more likely to stay in their jobs. So these aren't just like soft feelings. It's actually measurable patterns that impact what any education system is there to do: support students. Now, I want to close with a finding that brings all of this together. If we look back at 2 centuries of research in sociology and psychology, the single strongest predictor of health, happiness, and longevity is the breadth and depth of our positive social connections. Our saucers, the people who help us regulate, aren't optional, they're foundational. In the episodes ahead, we'll talk more about community care, belonging, grief, love, and the webs of support that make hope sustainable. But all of what's to come in the series rests on this truth: regulation is relational, and we were never meant to do this alone. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will see you next week with an interview, and we appreciate all of you who are reaching out. Please subscribe, like, and comment. Please share with other educators. And if you haven't yet signed up to receive Oxygen for Educators magazine, please find the link in the notes below so that you can get a copy that is gifted to educators from our generous sponsors, Schwab, Atmos, and TakiBox. You're not going to want to miss it. It's a beautiful keepsake magazine that takes all of the learnings we had from the interviews from season 1 and shares it with you with the permanence of print. So thanks again for being part of this, and hope you have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Oxygen for Educators. Please like, share, and follow, and if inclined, leave us a 5-star review so that we can keep making content for you. Let us hear from you if you know someone we should interview or a topic we should cover.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization. The content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended as professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to use their own judgment and seek appropriate professional support when needed. Oxygen for Educators, its host, and production partners are not responsible for any actions taken based on the information shared in this podcast.